Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. I am Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach. And today we're going to continue our conversation on frugality. As we jump into today's podcast, I have a story I want to share with you. When I was a child growing up, my parents wanted my siblings and I to have a sport, an activity that we enjoyed doing. When we lived in the Front Range of Colorado, I enjoyed karate. As most families do, we moved at some point. We moved up to the mountains, and where we were in the mountains, there wasn't a karate school. We moved up to Newcastle in the mountains. That's just about 15 minutes west of Glenwood Springs, if you're familiar with the area. They didn't have a Kempo karate studio. My mom thought it would be a good idea to replace my love for karate with bowling every year for my birthday as a kid. Since I was like 4 years old, I wanted our whole family to go out and go bowling. That was like the birthday activity that I got to choose every year. And it was really the only time out of the year that we got to go bowling. There was a bowling alley right next to the grocery store where my mom wanted to go grocery shopping. We had like one grocery store in the town, and it was just down the hill from where we lived. When she would go grocery shopping, she would drop me off at the bowling alley, and the owner of the bowling alley was kind enough to let me go in an hour before it opened, before anyone was there, and bowl one game every day. I did a summer camp with him where he had a whole bunch of kiddos come in and he taught them how to bowl. Now, by the time the years wrapped up there, I was getting more practice by doing bowling league and bowling a few games before and after. I increased how much I practiced as I continued pursuing the sport. I got to bowl in a number of excellent tournaments in and around the mountain area, in and around Newcastle, Colorado. Practicing helped me grow into being a better bowler. I started bowling league with an average of about 120 that first year. By the time we moved from Colorado to Kansas, I was averaging closer to 170, 180. After we moved to Kansas, I thought I was pretty good at bowling. I had shot well over 250 in a number of tournaments. And I was super stoked to be pursuing a perfect game. You need to know, if you've never been to Kansas, if you don't follow bowling, Kansas is like the headquarters for professional bowlers. Wichita State in particular is where most of the professional bowlers come out of. As a result, bowling is a different cultural phenomenon in Kansas than it is in Colorado. I thought that I was going to be able to roll into Kansas and be at the same level I was relative to the kids in Colorado. In order to be considered a good bowler in Kansas, even a youth bowler, you need to be averaging close to 200, if not over 200. That encouraged me to continue practicing even more. The pinnacle success that I had as a youth bowler was right after my freshman year in college. I got to go to the USBC Youth National Open. That year, it was held in Detroit, Michigan. My whole family packed up for this tournament. We drove out and made it a big family vacation. It was a good time. When we got to Detroit, I was nervous, but I had been practicing for nearly 6 or 7 years at this point. And I had been dreaming for well over 5 years of that time of going to a national tournament. And this was the moment that was going to make or break all those hours of practice, starting with going and bowling just one game a day. That year, for that one tournament, the one national tournament I'll probably ever get to bowl, I got to average 215. I've never done that well over a series of games averaging in league, nor in a tournament ever since. I think I finished in the top 12.5% of U20 bowlers in the United States. And that was a satisfying accomplishment for me. The one other thing that I got to do with bowling that compared was the time I got very, very close to the perfect game. A perfect game is 12 strikes in a row. I was in bowling league, bowling with my friends. It was just a normal day in league. I really, really wanted to do well this day. I practiced so much, and I wanted any day to be the first day I bowled a 300. I didn't care if it was across 2 games, like you start striking in the 4th or 5th frame of the first game, and then you finish 12 strikes later somewhere into the second game. It was I believe, the last game of the day. I left the 10 pin and I missed the spare. I remember walking away after, that first frame. It was a failure. I felt like I had failed, but I had a good attitude about it. I'd done this a number of times. I said, there's still a lot of game left. I could get the rest of them as strikes and make this a high game. One shot after another. Cool, calm, methodical repetition. The result of my practice, I got 2 strikes in a row, 4 strikes in a row, 8 strikes in a row. After 10 strikes in a row, I had exceeded my previous best. And I got that 11th one. I had a missed spare on frame 1, and the rest of the game was strikes. To this day, it's the best game that I've ever been able to do. I really wanted it to be 12 strikes in a row, though, so I went up and I bought 1 extra frame. 1 extra frame after league. I just needed to throw 1 more strike. And it was just like all 12 of my previous shots. And the result was the same as the first one. I left 1 pin. I made a giant 11-strike, 10-pin sandwich. I've got a little trophy. It's actually sitting on my desk here, representing that. It says 279, April 5th, 2014. I like to call this my I almost did it, or you almost made it trophy. It says 11 in a row. It's a fancy crystal. If you listen to the podcast audio only, you can't see it. But if you're watching on YouTube, I held it up for the camera. If you follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, we also filmed this podcast recording and put it on YouTube. I don't have anything that is required on there that you need to see in order to appreciate the podcast. But if you want to see my little USB-C trophy, it's on YouTube. So be sure to follow us there. What I learned from my time in bowling as a youth bowler was that practice was incredibly important. And in order to succeed, you needed to put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of practice. And it doesn't matter what you do. If you're not practicing, you're not going to succeed. The example that I love giving when it comes to practice beyond my personal experience with bowling is if you're going to go and run a marathon, you can do one of 2 things. You can get outside and you can practice. You can run every day. I mean, maybe take a day or 2 here and there for letting your body rest and recoup. But you can practice and you can build up the endurance. Or you can sit back and think about it. You can think about running. You can watch videos of other people running. You can mentally prepare yourself. But if you don't practice and you take your out-of-shape self that didn't practice and you go try to run a marathon, you may not make it to the finish line. You may walk there, but you're not going to do near as well as the person who went outside and ran every day. This is going to be the case in personal finance as well. We're going to continue that thought when we get to our main topic. But before we do that, before we delve into practice in your personal financial life, I want to share with you my budgeting tip of the day. Today's budgeting tip is to separate in your budget your groceries, the food that you're going to get from the store and cook at home, and your eating out. It's a common mistake to combine these two because they're both food, right? They both cover one of the 4 walls. You need to eat. However, eating out is significantly more expensive, even if you're doing the most inexpensive fast food that you can find, than going to the grocery store and buying groceries. If you're going to the store and you're cooking the average meal, and you're following a shopping list, you're couponing, you're looking for the sales, you can get the average cost per plate for cooking at home in and around $2 to $3. Looking at all of last year, my family was able to achieve an average of around $2.45 per plate. And so that's per meal per person. When you're eating out, I don't know any place other than Keller's in Texas that'll charge you less than $2.50 for anything. You're going to get an awful lot more food cooking at home than you would eating out. When you're eating out, even if it's fast food, you're paying for someone else's time to put that food together. You're paying for the atmosphere, the experience. You're paying for the brand. You're paying for that name on the wrapper. You're paying for the double golden arches. You're paying for the mascot that's outside the building or on the sign. You're paying for the lighting and the wait staff. You're paying for so much more that you don't have to pay for if you're doing your groceries at home. This is why if you want to be successful in your personal financial life, you need to separate eating out and your groceries. You need to look at them as two different things. You need to look at groceries as your need. You need to look at groceries as filling your requirement for the four walls. And you need to look at eating out as a luxury. You need to see eating out as a want. You need to see it as something that you don't need because you're tired or you don't want to make food at home. It needs to be a luxury item just because it costs so much more. Imagine if you ate out every meal and paid an average of $15 per meal as opposed to $2.50 for cooking at home and eating at home or taking a sack lunch to work. So that's my budgeting tip of today. Keep your groceries and your eating out separate. Now, let's dive back into the main topic of practicing. Recall, frugality is the intentional practice of prudent economy. We last week talked about how intentionality needs to involve writing down what you want to do so that you can clearly define what isn't done on a whim and what is done intentionally. We talked about how this lives in your budget. This is the whole idea of why having a budget can change your life, even if you are very frugal and you don't spend money. Having a budget is going to give you more control, and it's going to allow you to feel more free and more intentional than you ever have before with money. The thing is, if you write it down, if you write a budget, and you do it every month, you put pencil to paper, and then you set it aside, you put it in a drawer, you forget about it, and you go do whatever. Well, you're not putting your intentional plan into practice. It's the same thing as writing a shopping list down and then putting the shopping list in the drawer and going to the store saying, oh, I'll remember it. I'm going to remember what I put on my shopping list and I'll stick to it. It'll be fine. It's okay. I don't have to write that down. I'll remember. That's the greatest lie any student has ever said in a classroom. So I don't have to write that down. And I don't know anyone who would forget on purpose their shopping list when they go shopping, if they make a shopping list. So why would we do that with our budget? Why would we write a budget and then forget about it, set it aside, not check on it, not keep it up to date? If you want to be practicing your budget, you need to be checking on it at least every weekend throughout the month, just to put in what you've spent so far, see what you have left to spend, and check if you have overspent on any category. Before you go out and you make major purchases, this includes grocery trips. Before you go out and spend money that you've budgeted for, be sure that you reference the budget and see how much do I have in here to spend. This isn't looking at your bank account and going, oh, I have money in there. This isn't looking at your credit limit on your credit card and saying, oh, I still have some credit. This is checking your plan, not what's necessarily available to you on the whole. But if you broke down every dollar into a category. If you did a zero-based budget, then you need to be referencing your plan for how you're going to go and spend that money. You need to be doing this in order to put what you have on paper into practice. And I know that this is hard. I know that this is challenging. And that's why we also need to practice in the sense of repeating the budget. It takes about 3 months of practicing a budget before the budget really starts to click, before what you're putting on paper starts to really reflect your behavior in reality. If we want to be successful, we need to be able to persist through failures. We need to be able to persist through missing that first strike so that we can get the rest of them and do the best that we can and achieve a level of success that we didn't know was possible before we started budgeting. Again, it takes about 3 months of repetitive practice before budgeting starts to really click. And even after that, we need to be persistent in our practice of it. When I was in college, I knew it was important to write a budget. I remember my freshman year writing monthly budgets for probably the first 2 months of the academic year. And then it sort of just fell by the wayside. I wasn't making a lot of money. I wasn't spending a lot of money. I was a broke college kid. I felt like it was more important for me to be putting my time into studying. What I found, though, is any month that I stopped writing the budget or I said, I'm just not going to spend money if it's not needed, I almost always spent double of what I did when I was on the budget. And I always felt more stressed when I wasn't practicing my budget. After having started it, if I didn't write it and I didn't have a plan and I just went into the month without my mission, without my zero-based budget, I would find myself telling myself, I deserve this, and then buying it. Or, I've been pretty good, I haven't spent on these things, I guess I can make this work. Or checking my checking account and going off of, okay, do I still have money in order to buy this thing? If I'm checking my checking account and asking myself, do I still have enough in order to pay for a want, I'm doing it wrong. I need to be more intentional than that. And that intentionality is going to give me freedom. And I need to actually practice that. Ever since I got engaged, and ever since I've been married for the past 3+ years, my wife and I have done a monthly budget without fail before the month begins. And it has been spectacular. We have not had any significant major question of, are we going to be able to afford this in the middle of the month? Because we've already planned it out on paper. We have gone through temptations where there's something that looks bright and shiny and exciting that I might want to jump and buy. But because we didn't put it into the budget that month, because it was a want that could have compromised some of our needs, it was so much better to be able to say no to it then. And no, when you're practicing a budget doesn't mean never. No, when you're practicing a budget means not yet. And the question you get to answer by budgeting and putting your budget into practice every month is answering when. The budget, intentionality, and practice frugality on the whole means that you get to achieve the things that you genuinely want, the things that bring you the most joy, the most utility. All you have to do is tell yourself when. You get to control when you're in control of your money, when you're in control of practice, when you're in control of your intentions. When we're running a budget, when we're practicing our budget, it's important to know how we did last month. It's important to reconcile how well we did, how frugal we were that month prior. It's important as we practice anything to recognize our mistakes. Back when I was into bowling, you had to be focused. It was as much a mental game as it was a physical game. I'm a very type A personality. I would try really, really hard. And if I got too much inside my head when I was bowling, it would translate into me white-knuckling the ball. I'd be squeezing so hard that I would lose the control that I was trying to impose into the practice of bowling. My coach told me, he pulled me aside once when I was in bowling league and was like, Jay, I need you to relax. I need you to be able to go through the motions so that you can bowl better, so you can practice better. I need you to relax. My answer was, I'm trying really hard. And it was somewhat a self-fulfilling prophecy. The harder I tried to force the outcome, the harder it became to practice. The more that I became so intense that it was overwhelming and I'd get inside my head and I'd feel like I couldn't do it no matter how hard I tried, the harder it actually became, the more I became a self-fulfilling prophecy in that regard. Looking back on that moment of not being able to relax, I've been able to learn from that mistake. I've been able to breathe and find that positive place in the mental game when I'm bowling. And the same is true when you're practicing your budget. If you go through a month, you try really hard, it's frustrating, and you can't seem to get a grip, even though your level of control that you're putting into this thing is so intense, and you feel like you're failing, you need to be able to look back at what went wrong and learn from it. Practice allows us to learn from our past mistakes when we didn't do as well as we wanted to, when we didn't achieve what we wanted to do intentionally, when we couldn't put that fully into practice, when we overspend on that category by a little bit, or when something popped up and you didn't handle it the way that you wanted to in your budget. When you look back and you say, I could have done this better. How? You get to learn how, and then you get to practice that the next month. That's how we get better and better. That's how we go from averaging 120 to averaging over 200 in the game of budgeting. I really hope that today helped put some perspective into applying your budget, putting what you've done intentionally on paper into practice, and learning in an emotional way, internalizing frugality in that manner. Next week, we're going to talk about the third facet. Remember, frugality is the intentional practice of prudent economy. So next week, we're going to talk about the prudence aspect of personal finance, of budgeting, of your hope-filled financial future. Until then, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.